and this dependence on foreign sources of oil is of great concern to all of us. In the year 2000, the solar water heater behind me, which is being dedicated today, will still be here, supplying cheap, efficient energy. A generation from now, this solar heater can either be a curiosity, a museum piece, an example of a road not taken, or it can be just a small part of one of the greatest and most exciting adventures ever undertaken by the American people.
What happened to those panels? President Ronald Reagan had them removed. Had President Reagan not have been opposed to environmental laws, we most likely would not have to worry about climate change and the effects, like freak storms, that are occurring more often. Also, pine bark beetles would not have decimated forests because there would have been no warmer temperatures and their population and region would not have expanded. And human activities would not have bleached coral reefs because we would have never released as much CO2. In 1977, with the election of President Jimmy Carter, we had a chance to prevent the effects of climate change and go down a road towards being very environmentally friendly. President Carter was very against using fossil fuels wastefully and frowned upon wasteful actions at every chance he got, such as appearing on live television, wearing a sweater, and turning down the thermostat to show that if the president was doing it, the public could too. President Carter also passed many laws protecting the environment and regulating the amount of oil used by the United States, such as strengthening the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to better enforce and create laws regarding the environment. A turning point in climate change was the election of Ronald Reagan. While in office, he attempted to weaken the Clean Air Act, promoted wasteful use of natural resources, and claimed global climate change was a myth. His policy started us moving towards being very dependent on oil, and because of that, the US and many others in the world are going to suffer the effects of climate change. President Reagan acted very anti-environmental because he was thanking the oil industries for getting the US moving again. Had President Reagan paid attention to climate change, we most likely would not have to worry about CO2 emissions. Millions of plant and animal species would have never been endangered or extinct, and we would still be admiring many magnificent glaciers. During President Reagan's term, he showed a strong opposition towards environmental laws that would have reduced the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. A law that heavily affected climate change is the Clean Air Act. As a byproduct of its goal to reduce pollutants in the air, the act also reduced CO2 emissions from many coal plants and cars. A strong defender of the Clean Air Act was Henry Waxman, who was a member of the House of Health and the Environmental Subcommittee for 16 years. He worked throughout the 1980s to strengthen the law and was one of the primary creators.
I remember testimony over the years from, let's say, 1981 to 1990 when we finally adopted revisions of the law, and in 1981 there was an effort by President Reagan and even some of the Democrats to support an industry coalition that would have gutted the Clean Air Act. So we were facing a demise of a very successful law. When President Reagan ran for office, he campaigned on the idea that air pollution is not from industry or from cars, it's from trees. He was poorly informed, even though he came from California, about the air pollution problem, and sided with the industry groups that were telling him that they shouldn't have to meet regulatory requirements. It would cost them money, they said it would cost them jobs, it would hurt the economy, and he bought that line.
Our CO2 levels on Earth have risen and fallen periodically over the course of the Earth's life, but has risen drastically in the last century. In the early 1800s, the levels of carbon dioxide were around 290 parts per million. Around 1896, a professor and physicist named Svante Arrhenius made a connection between global warming and human carbon emissions. For many years, no one paid attention to these signs until 1945, where the U.S. Office of Naval Research funded studies looking into climate change. The carbon levels made a jump during the 1900s around the oil embargo. Before President Reagan fixed the economy by removing oil and gas price controls, causing production to accelerate and prices to drop, the carbon levels were around 350 parts per million. After President Reagan was elected, large cars and SUVs became a common sight. In 1986, the Reagan administration lowered fuel efficiency standards from 27.5 miles per gallon to 26 miles per gallon. It had taken about 10 years for President Carter and President Ford to build up the standards, and then President Reagan reduced the standards in his term alone. The reduction was only 1.5 miles per gallon, but it convinced people that fuel efficiency standards weren't needed and encouraged them to buy larger cars. The Reagan administration discredited climate change throughout his term, and President Reagan himself had discredited climate change even after he ended his. For example, in 1994, on a television show, Reagan said, "Environmentalist wackos of the past 3 years have been talking about global warming, and they've been suggesting that the Earth is warming to the point that we're all going to die, we're all going to melt, we're all going to burn. And we just got perhaps the coldest winter on record going on in many parts of the United States." This made people laugh about climate change and not take it seriously, and that kept people from saving energy. Many species have suffered because of these movements. The polar bear has lost much of its habitat due to rising temperatures and melting ice. Grizzly bears are losing vital sources of food because a species of pine bark beetle have migrated into their habitat due to warmer temperatures and have killed many trees. Also, many species of sea turtle and wildcats are losing habitat due to higher sea levels. There have been many changes to the environment in the last few decades. Glaciers are melting, leaving many small villages that rely on the glacier for water are left with none. Stronger storms are occurring more often, destroying crops and homes, and floods and droughts are part of everyday life in some areas of the world. The Earth could have been a very different, better place if the Reagan administration hadn't ignored the signs of climate change and attempted to weaken laws that would have sent us down a better path.